Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for our show. Today we're doing a conversation with a candidate. We have Mark Walczyk in the studio with us today, and he's running for the 116th Assembly seat up here in St. Lawrence and Jefferson counties. Mark, thank you so much for coming in today. It's nice to have you come in, and I just want to take a second to show people the map of the River District, which stretches along the St. Lawrence River and covers the northern half of both counties. Let me just start out, Mark, by telling you that conversations with candidates are designed to provide voter education that thoughtfully and civilly discusses the issues of public policy and governance vital to our community. They're nonpartisan, and they invite a candidate to come in and explain his or her positions, records, and ideas outside of the 30-second campaign ad spot and the discussion constraints of a debate format. We recently hosted the other candidate for this race, and both shows will be going up on our YouTube channel at the same time. As a reminder to our viewers, these conversations preclude negative campaigning or mention of the other candidate. We really want to focus on your ideas and your positions. So we'd like to give you just a minute to introduce yourself to viewers who might not know you because this is the first time you've run for office up here in St. Lawrence County. So go ahead and give us a little bit of your background if you would, please.
Well, Donna, first off, thank you so much for the mission here and getting that message out. It's critically important to voter education, and I know a big part of your mission is getting voter participation. So on November 6th, I hope that the North Country comes out strong and really exercises their voice, and especially their state government. And you talked about before we started rolling, the county legislative seats that are going on up here. There's a lot of excitement. And these are the races that really impact our lives here in northern New York. So
that's right, all politics is local.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I'm Mark Walczyk. I'm running in the 116th Assembly District, which is the River District. I'm currently a city council member in the city of Watertown, but as you saw on the map, this district stretches from Sackett's Harbor to Messina. It's pretty big, and I'm currently a city council member in Watertown, been doing that for a few years. Not a stranger to the North Country by any means. I worked for State Senator Ritchie for 8 years, for 2 years as her legislative director, and for 6 years as her district director. So I learned the ropes in Albany a little bit, and learned the bread and butter of service in public life, and that's constituent services. Fighting for families and individuals in the North Country that are struggling, and working with small businesses to cut through red tape so that they can grow their employment here in northern New York. I'm also an Army reservist and just finished up 2 years of company command time of the Canton unit right down the road here. 135 excellent men and women in uniform that drill 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, and I was honored to have that position of company commander for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm actually very familiar with that unit. One of my sons was in it for 12 years, so we knew a lot about. They were. You haven't been deployed with them though, have you?
No, ma'am.
Yeah. So Matt had been deployed. So
well, thank you for your service and your support as a military family. Well, absolutely, nice. It's the families, and sometimes we don't talk about their sacrifice, but I know my mother would be remiss if I didn't thank you for worrying. That's
right. We appreciate that. So, Mark, why don't you give us your idea of what the three biggest challenges are that are facing New York State and the 116th, and what you think you can do to impact these issues if you are elected to the Assembly?
I want to say jobs, jobs, jobs. As 1, 2, and 3. So I'll start off with jobs, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure we've got a great education system here. We've got a great higher education institutions with SUNY Jefferson down in Jefferson County, and then the 4 institutions here in Canton and Potsdam that do a great job of educating our youth. The problem is we educate them and then we export them. Some have said that the problem with upstate New York is the climate, and that's why people are moving out of state. I disagree. I think the business climate is what's hostile. We tend to like our winters, and a lot of people like to ski and snowshoe and snowmobile, and we enjoy it. And I get a little excited once the leaves start to turn and we get a little crispness in the air. But we do need to do a lot of work in Albany to make sure that the business climate is more friendly for businesses to grow and thrive in northern New York. So jobs is at the top of the list.
Well, actually, that leads right into my next question. One of the things that we know is that poverty is it's a fact of life up here in rural New York. In fact, all of rural New York. Often St. Lawrence County leads the state in unemployment. Unfortunately, we have a lot of low-wage, part-time jobs that have taken the place of some of the good blue-collar jobs that we used to have about 10 years ago before some of the plants in Messina closed and the economic downturn. What do you consider to be a living wage here in the North Country? Because you talk about jobs, so what do we need for a living wage for those jobs?
Yeah, I think you make a great point in pointing out what is a good living wage for us here in the North Country. A lot of the systems that are built in Albany are built for statewide and don't necessarily look at different income levels in different areas and what our cost of living is in those areas. So we create this poverty donut hole where if you make up to this level, then or if you make less than this level, then all of these benefits are open to you. And if you make $1 over this, then none of them are. So there's almost a disincentive to go out and work the extra mile. You create a poverty donut hole. So to speak. So that's something that we definitely need to adjust in Albany. We need to continue to work through that. I think the more we can tier those systems to help people bridge out of poverty rather than lumping them into groups saying, these are the poor people and as soon as you make $1 over that, well, you're on your own. We're not going to help you anymore. I think we need to bridge out of poverty there.
Okay, so let's follow up for a second and ask you what that dollar figure is. What do you think is a living wage here in the North Country that allows people to live independently, meet their expenses, and stay off of public services?
I'd have to get back to you on a specific dollar figure, but I think that would be kind of the concern. I think when you're talking about whether it's a home heating benefit or whether you're talking about a welfare benefit or a Medicaid benefit, a lot of those tend to be in the same range, and helping people bridge out of poverty is less about picking the dollar figure and saying this is what they deserve if they're poor, and once they are out of there they deserve nothing. I think tiering that process to help people bridge out of poverty is critically important.
Okay. Recently, Amazon announced they were going to be raising their minimum wage to $15 an hour, and that was the result of a lot of criticism on the part of employees who said, we can't live on what you're making, and so there was a real push on that. Walmart has done the same thing. They've talked about raising minimum wages. And a lot of what happens is that folks who are working in those low-wage jobs that don't pay a living wage end up on social services, which, as we know in St. Lawrence County, is funded first by the county and then later on is reimbursed by the state and the feds. So do you have a position on making sure that low-wage employers have put systems in place that give their employees a fair wage?
I think you drew a couple of examples where the private sector can sometimes drive and listen to their employees and raise wages so that they're doing better for themselves. A concern absolutely is that sometimes that's part-time employment and benefits are going to need to fill in where they're lacking specifically for that employer. And I think not just in the North Country, but I think in the country. You've got a story of people working 2 or 3 jobs to pay for the people that are working no jobs. And we need to make sure that, we're giving people a hand up, not necessarily a handout, so that they're incentivized to work their way out of poverty and not getting, complacent there. And I think we have a great work ethic here in northern New York. And people want to work their way out of poverty. We just need to create the methods so that they can.
So do you think that employers have a responsibility to pay for people who do that kind of work? Do employers have a role to play in that? Or should all be, they should be strip mining North Country dollars out by underpaying their employees?
Employers absolutely have, they need to have a seat at the table. The employees, as you pointed out, need to have a seat at the table. And everyone needs to be listened to here. And I think that's such an important job of an assembly member, is that active listening. I've seen and have the unique experience of being a staff member So I've seen politicians in Albany, sort of get surrounded by Albany and lose touch with their constituency. And it's sad to watch members do that. You need to be a proactive listener. You need to be out in the community. You need to be inviting those business members, those community members, those employees to the table anytime you're going to push a policy forward.
Okay, thank you. One of the big issues that is an absolutely critical quality of life issue for everybody is healthcare, and it plays a major role here in our economic development in this district, because some of our biggest private employers are actually in the healthcare field. Another, of course, big private employer is education, as you'd mentioned earlier. So what is your position on the New York State Health Act?
I have a lot of concerns about the New York State Health Act, and the number one concern being cost. We need to make sure that people are covered and that people have quality access to care here in the North Country. And as I've talked to CEOs of the hospital and members of hospital boards in the area, the concern is some of these policies that come out of Albany don't necessarily support our community-based health centers and our community hospitals. To make sure that Claxton Hepburn is doing well, to help where Messina needs assistance, to make sure that Canton Potsdam has needs met. So we're not driving the policy out of Albany, but rather listening from the ground up and making sure that people have quality access to care in their community.
Well, one of the things that drives the quality and availability of healthcare here in the North Country has been the Affordable Care Act, which was, of course, passed a number of years ago in Washington. It put in place a lot of funding mechanisms that allowed for expansion of healthcare in some of the hospitals, as you had just mentioned up here. The current administration and Congress have attempted to repeal a lot of that Affordable Health Care Act, and that's going to hurt the funding stream. What policy positions do you have on protecting healthcare in terms of making sure that we can continue to have what we have right now? We don't want to lose it.
Yeah, it's just that you gotta continue to listen to the hospitals and to the hospital boards and the employees, and give everyone a seat at the table and listen to their needs. I think we're doing some great things here in St. Lawrence County, talking about the health system at large and how the hospitals can recruit doctors and complement each other rather than compete, because it can be very difficult up here to recruit good physicians to locate in our hospitals. So complementing services and making sure that we have that access to care. You're talking about places where you go if you have a heart attack or an emergency. I would hate to see that consolidate down into, pushing people to Syracuse or Rochester or Albany or Vermont. I think it's critically important to make sure that we have the support in our local community hospitals.
Yeah, that's the way it was in the bad old days before we were actually able to expand healthcare. If you had something really wrong with you, you had to get out of the area. Yeah. So having that quality healthcare here is very important. One more question on healthcare, Mark. What's your position on the Reproductive Health Act here in New York State? Is it needed, and if so, why or why not?
I largely support it. There's only one sticking point on there, and I would have no problem with it otherwise.
Okay, well, would you want to describe for us what your sticking point is?
I'm pro-life.
What does that have to do with the Reproductive Health Act, which is simply codifying New York State law so that it matches settled case law at the federal level?
My understanding is there's a late-term abortion provision there, and I do have an issue with that.
Okay. That is actually in the case of the health of the mother. So they put the health of the mother first. One of the things that is a critical piece of the employment picture, as you say, jobs, 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 is childcare. What is your understanding of the current state of access to childcare here in the 116th?
Critically needed. Sat down recently with a group of child care professionals that talked about the critical need here. And this is actually, it segues out of our conversation about bridging out of poverty really well. Because if you have a mother and father who are both working and trying to bridge out of poverty and struggling to get by in northern New York, having children may actually impact that. And
Oh, it definitely will impact it, yeah.
yeah, the stigma I think that we need to shed away, and this doesn't come from the legislature, but I think as a society we're starting to move forward, but we still have a long way to go. Is that we still default to the woman stays in the home and is the primary caregiver, and if someone is going to sacrifice their career, it's going to be the female of the household. I think we need to continue to shift away from that. And I think we have a long way to go making sure that there's good and affordable options. Talking to some of the child care providers, there's some red tape and some regulations that are great for safety and very important. You want to make sure that if you drop your children off at a daycare facility, that it's a safe environment and they're going to be taken care of by professionals that do a good job. But at the same time, there's some regulations and some things, just like any business, that get in the way, make it difficult for them to compete. They have a lot of concerns about reimbursement rates. Is this something that I'm still learning about? I don't have children of my own yet. I'm not married yet, but I plan to raise a family here in the North Country, and it's something certainly that has a concern to make sure that we have that bridge out of poverty, and also is already a current concern for a lot of North Country families, so something I'm going to continue to pay a lot of attention to.
Good, thank you. One of the things that concerns a lot of Americans, and certainly a lot of folks up here in the North Country, climate change is no longer one of those things that's coming down the road in 100 years. It's, we're concerned about wildfires and floodwaters and drought and hurricanes and heat waves. All of those things that people in this country have been experiencing in the last few months. In fact, today I just read a report that this has been the most active hurricane and typhoon season on the planet since they've been recorded. So it's a real and present concern for many folks. Where do you stand on climate change, and what, if anything, should New York State government be doing in this area?
We got to do our part, absolutely. Something that I've been talking about by way of the environment on this campaign trail is clean water. It's one of our greatest assets here in northern New York and in the River District. I mean, it's called the River District for Pete's sakes, and that's not just because of the St. Lawrence River. There's a number of rivers that run right through this town and a number of the towns, and we need to make sure that our watershed is protected and that water is kept clean. The other is we are way under recycled in Jefferson and St. Lawrence counties. So we need to work with our municipalities and find a way that we can get single stream recycling and finally catch up. I think we're decades behind where we should be when it comes to simple recycling programs to keep those that reduce, reuse, recycle, to keep those recyclables out of our landfills and to get them back repurposed, I think is critically important. We have to be, I don't think, and I have the conservative line on the ballot as well as the Republican and the Reform and the Independent line on the ballot, but I don't think being a conservative and a conservationist are in conflict at all. I think they're right in line, and I think we have a lot of great stewards of our environment here in northern New York, and I look forward to pushing policies forward that are environmentally friendly.
Okay, thank you. As you know, Fort Drum is the largest major military installation here in New York State, and in fact, probably you can say that about the whole Northeast.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's certainly an incredibly important part of the 116th. Describe for us, if you would, Mark, your interaction with Fort Drum and how Fort Drum affects the 116th in your mind.
The other bullet I would add to that, pun intended, is that it is the largest single site employer in New York State. And I think when I think about the type of assembly member that I'm going to be, you're adding your voice to a body that is 150 members. The assembly is a big house. There's a lot of voices there. So you think about the ways that you're going to define your role as an assembly member. How are the other members of the assembly going to think of me? Fort Drum certainly at the forefront. I also like to think of this district as the front yard for America, because when Canadians come over the border, that's what they think. So that's a slight tangent. I also want to add that voice. Fort Drum, critically important. A lot of these things are held at the federal level, but there's actions that you can take from the New York State Assembly, from the legislature, to support Fort Drum. The Army's Compatible Use Buffer, or ACUB program they call it, that's to help encroachment around military installations. So buying up some of the development rights around Fort Drum, and that's something the state's been working with the Tug Hill Commission on, supporting that effort to make sure that we're not developing in areas that possibly could be expanded, or at least you wouldn't want to encroach on current military training. I certainly have plenty of personal experience on Fort Drum. I've rolled down tracked vehicles and plenty of Humvees down the Antwerp Tank Trail, and have that experience there.
So yeah, we know of course that military life these days is very stressful, and so there's a lot of support services that communities that surround Fort Drum need to put in place to make sure that we're giving the soldiers and their families the support they need.
You know, and yeah, absolutely. And Fort Drum is, you know, the crux of the economy in Jefferson County especially, and it stretches into St. Lawrence County slightly. I think when I look at the retirees off of Fort Drum, I see a lot of the same opportunities that I see in some of the same age groups that I see with our graduates from our higher education institutions. You know, if you do one enlistment and you're retiring out of Fort Drum, maybe you've lived all over, or maybe if there's a job here, there would be a good fit. So working to make sure that there's good paying jobs here in the North Country, I think, you know, Fort Drum could be a great asset and a great partnership. And there's some ways that we're working there, but I think there's a lot more work to be done.
All right, well thanks Mark. I want to chat with you now about voting reform and modernization. New York has the dubious distinction of having one of the poorest voter turnout records every election. We have a very antiquated system. We don't have early voting in any way like lots of other states have. What's your stand on the need to reform and modernize New York state voting laws, and what are your policy initiatives in this area if you agree that it needs to be changed?
Well, first off, thanks again for doing programs like this, because I think voter education is critically important, and I think we have to do all that we can as individuals to shed the apathy and encourage voter involvement. That's number one. And yeah, ease of voting, support policies. I want to make sure that everyone in New York State is encouraged to vote and can do it.
Well, there's a number of policy initiatives that actually the Assembly votes on every year, and it hasn't made it through the New York State Senate, unfortunately. But you know, what are the kinds of things that you can see that would make a difference?
How do you mean?
To make it easier for folks to vote.
Well, I think they moved in the right direction. You can now vote. You can now register to vote online. There's the DMV voting option. So registering.
Yeah. Now you can't vote with DMV, but
right.
You can register. Right.
Registering to vote has become a little bit easier for us. I think that's key.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up here, Mark, what would you like voters to know about you and think about as they head to the polls? Why should someone vote for you? What is it that you want to leave in their minds?
Well, I've got a little bit of experience, and I've got a lot of energy, and I want to continue. This is a job that is 100% about service. So I want to work hard to represent you in the 116th Assembly District. I want to make sure that when students are graduating from our institutions or from our high schools, that they have job options to stay here in the North Country, because I think it's a beautiful place to live, work, and raise a family. I think New York State is overbearing with some of their taxes, regulations, and fees on our businesses that sort of hamper that opportunity. We've got great assets up here. We just need to get the whole thing to come together so that we have job opportunities here in northern New York. I want to bring that pride to the region. That isn't just Fort Drum, isn't just a vacation spot, but this is the front yard of the United States of America for Canadians. That you know, if you look at the other side of the border, it's their southern Riviera. You go right across the river, and people in Ogdensburg will drive over the bridge because the Chinese food is better over there. And they've got some great development and some great industry, and they take a lot of pride in their front yard. And sometimes our policy out of Albany makes me feel like northern New York is the backyard of New York State. It's not. It's the front yard of America.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We want to remind folks that Election Day is November 6th. That's less than 2 weeks away. If you will not be in the county on Election Day, you can certainly get an absentee ballot and vote that way. And elections are decided by the people who vote, so make sure your vote counts. Thank you. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, which is filmed here in the Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center of the Potsdam Public Library. This show is a civic collaboration between the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters and American Association of University Women and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country Matters. Mark, thank you so much for coming down today.